Many, if not all, sedentary people have their foundation myth. For the Romans, it began with Romulus and Remus. For the British, it's a little more complex, but for the modern UK, it goes all the way back to 1066, and for Americans, to the days of the American Revolution and the Founding Fathers. But the years 1914 to 1945 have irrevocably changed the nature and character of Western civilization and her foundation myths. World War I and World War II were, if we look at it reasonably, a single conflict. One that started in 1914 but was not resolved in 1918, and for that reason, the grievances created at Versailles were revisited in 1939 and ended with the utter destruction of not only Germany, but as an expressed intention of the Allies, the breaking of the German spirit. But in the rush to make sure the Germans would never rise up again, the same mental virus of cultural shame, self-loathing, and contempt for what had come before was contracted by the so-called Western victors of that fratricidal war. In the summer of 1914, Western civilization, it could be argued, was at its zenith. It stood across the world, powerful, prosperous, growing, and most importantly, confident. By the summer of 1945, and with the only beneficiary of the second bout of war in Europe being the United States, the continent itself was shattered, bankrupt, divided into two camps, and in a state of psychological shock. And for the next 20 years, the continent took the time to slowly rebuild itself. But it was the baby boom generation born after that conflict, and beginning in the 1960s, well, they began to reject all of the history, morality, and beliefs that had been bequeathed them by previous generations. This generation simply rebelled for the sake of it, and it was at this time that the foundation myth for the entirety of Western civilization morphed into what we currently enact when we go to school, speak with friends, read the news, and watch television. And what you're witnessing today in 2017 is the result of the steady march and inculcation in our populaces of our new cultural foundation myth, which is profoundly negative. But before I get ahead of myself, first of all, what is a foundation myth and what functions does it provide a society? Well, first, it comports and provides an origin, framework, and superstructure for a society and how it interacts with the world and itself. Second, it defines what is the ultimate good and conversely, ultimate evil for the reasons of defining values, and from those to justify who holds power. And third, it determines and defines what is held sacred in a society. For the modern West, from Australia to the US and back to the old continent, at least the countries that were not subsumed by the Soviet Union, the narrative of the Second World War has become our new foundation myth. And if you think about it, the reason is it fulfills all three functions. Whenever referring to modern history, the line is drawn. We live in the post-war period. For the most part, the lines on the maps, the institutions, and more importantly, how we define our era as a society, all find their origins in World War II. You learn from a very young age that the ultimate incarnation of pure evil were the Nazis, and thus those that oppose Nazis are the ultimate good. From this stance of ultimate good, Western civilization derives its core values of anti-nationalism, unity being a weakness and diversity being a strength. All measure of civilizational confidence is bigotry. Any questioning with regards to the differences in people, cultures, and their compatibility is taboo. This is why, for example, the violence perpetrated by groups like Antifa can be morally justified, at least to themselves. Anyone who is a nationalist, anyone who wants to retain tradition, anyone who wants to limit immigration or believes in things like gender roles, is enacting in their minds the narrative of the ultimate evil. It is self-evident when you hear mobs of automatons screeching at any group or individual they disagree with Nazis off our streets, Nazis off our streets.
Gone off our streets! Nazis gone off our streets! Nazis gone off our streets!
So now, maybe perhaps you might be able to understand how a gay Jewish man who enjoys interracial sex, that being Milo Yiannopoulos, could ever be so ridiculously tarred with a term like Nazi. Basically, at this point, a Nazi is anyone that disagrees with any aspect of the current World War II Foundation myth. The only real value, topic, or event that is held as sacrosanct and cannot be mocked, joked about, or even questioned on pain of imprisonment in many countries in Europe is the Holocaust. Throughout the Western world in its entirety, to question even the details of the Holocaust is to have yourself shunned by society and made a social pariah. Just ask Andrew Anglin over at the now defunct Daily Stormer. And this is also why the faux outrage when kids in East Asia cosplay in SS uniforms is so ludicrous. The Holocaust is not part of their foundation myth, nor is it sacred to them. They just like the fashion and aren't trying to hurt anyone's feelings. But the outrage you see coming from the West is our society's trying to transfer its values onto another society's, put simply. And it's here where we begin to understand the West's self-loathing and what really is a sincere desire for collective cultural, physical, and psychological suicide. Because all three functions of our post-war foundation myth are negative in the extreme. Instead of the origin being one of strength, fertility, and of a new and blossoming beginning, it's one of violence, death, and destruction. Instead of ultimate good taking the central position in the story, it is in fact occupied by ultimate evil. In the post-war world, Adolf Hitler is the personification of pure, unadulterated evil, and it is he that holds the central position in our World War II narrative. Instead of the sacred being that which is revered, venerated, and mysterious in nature, it is the Holocaust, a crime against humanity. Simply put, our new World War II foundation myth is an extremely negative one and has poisoned the spirit of Western civilization and has caused it to lose all confidence in itself, its values, and even the reason for its very existence, and given time, will destroy it utterly. All thought and what is considered the bounds and topics one may speak and orient oneself in are all downstream from this myth, and as long as the West's understanding of itself is determined by this negative foundation myth, the only direction is down. The power of myths is not a trivial thing. Lose your original foundation myth, and you will lose your identity. Look at the United States. Before the World War II foundation myth supplanted its original foundation myth, its origin was settlers founding a new and just land. Ultimate good was central to the narrative and was centered around freedom and the ability to pursue happiness. And the sacred was encapsulated by family, community, country, God. America's previous specific foundation myth, since the adoption of the all-new encompassing Western World War II foundation myth, and through its lens sees America's origin in the theft of the land from peaceful and noble natives. Ultimate evil in the form of slavery is central to the narrative, and the sacred is the unquestioning belief in white supremacy and the need to dismantle it at any cost. This is why you will see things like the push to remove everything from Jackson from the $20 US note to the defunding of presidential monuments in Washington, D.C. If this was still the dominant foundation myth in the United States, it might be able to last the slow rot, but not so with the new World War II foundation atop it. It is geospecific bad, but it's not that bad. What's happening in the wider West is even worse. The entire West is not only losing their local, but also its civilizational identity, and has been chained to this new World War II foundation myth, which has borne the West its new corrosive, self-hating, and malignant identity, and will, if not, as stated previously, utterly destroy it. Maybe now you can understand Germany's wild desire to destroy themselves as quickly as possible. They are the progenitors and genesis of this new foundation myth. Whether truthfully or not, doesn't matter. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please consider supporting the channel via Patreon. Also find Black Pigeon on the usual social media and check out the website blackpigeonspeaks.com for more interesting information like this.